If you're here, that probably means you care about equity and inclusion, but you might be feeling a little uncertain, a little unsure, confused about where to go and what you can do to support your employees. And we've had this, like, it's become a culture war between anti-DEI and everything else. And I think instead of getting in that tug of war, we just drop the rope, play the game our way, and really work to build truly inclusive workplaces. I think that we need to start thinking differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why I think design thinking is exactly what we need to meet this moment. You might be thinking, what the heck is design thinking? Or maybe you've heard of it as human-centered design, which I call I call design thinking the implementation arm of human-centered design. And just like the name suggests, it's a design that puts people at the center of whatever they're designing. And product developers, software developers, and now more and more service providers are looking at design thinking, applying design thinking to create new services, new experiences for their clients. Now, you may have think that you've never heard of human-centered design or never heard of design thinking, but if you've ever walked into a Starbucks, if you've ever bought an Apple product, ever booked a hotel or a stay on Airbnb, drunk a Pepsi product, you've experienced human centered design. You just didn't know it. And I think that one of the reasons why it's such a powerful tool for moments like this is that it's all about empathy. And it's also about really being iterative and going through and trying things, seeing how it works, and then testing and then taking that information back. Maybe you try it again. So we call it in design, we call it building our way forward. And that's really, I think, when there's chaos and uncertainty, that's the best we can do. Try something, take a few steps, look around, see how that went. Where do you think things are going now? Because they're shifting so quickly. And then maybe you change direction, maybe go down a little bit, maybe you back up and then go down. So there's all the kinds of the ideas that you're just trying. Get something out in the world, take that bias to action and try something, test it, come back and refine. And we do this over and over and over again until we finally get to wherever we want to be. And we have with something that we think really works in this particular time, in this particular firm. It reflects your own personal or your own firm's values, goals, and priorities. And so I think that that's such a powerful way to approach equity and inclusion in this time. So now I'm going to explain my method for applying design thinking to equity and inclusion. It's based on design thinking, based on the same principles of human-centered design. But since we're not looking at products, we're not looking at services, we're looking at inside of the firm and seeing how things work there. I had to tweak it a little bit, but I think you'll see how valuable it is. It hits all the elements of design thinking with all the benefits, which are empathy, the iterative, bias to action, as I mentioned, the ability to think outside the box and really get creative, and really opportunity to come up with innovative solutions that might not otherwise have surfaced. So let's take a look at the method. All right, I call this my 3A, 4I method because we've got 3A's: assess, align, act, and we're doing that for impact, the I, 4I. So we want to go through each of these, and then we'll circle back around and in and out through them as you go through the design process, especially as you're taking those small steps and you're reassessing. You might take a different action or understand the problem a little bit differently and go a different way. So we go through these. It's not linear, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not even always in order 1, 2, 3, 4. It might be, usually at first it's 1, 2, 3, 4, but then you might go back to 1, you might go back to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then back to 1. And so it's that idea that you're always improving and you're continuously learning and designing and rethinking things as you go along and gather more information or as the landscape changes. The first thing we do is assess. And this is something I think is critical to human centered design. And I think it's also something that traditional problem solving, traditional initiatives don't always do and don't really take into account. And that's the actual people that are impacted by this approach, by whatever you're designing for. So we need to make sure that we are actually listening to the people, to all the people that are going to be affected by our new policies, by our new processes. For example, if it's gender equity and you want to figure out how you can better support your women attorneys, or in my case, or other women in your firm, and see them stay long enough to make it into leadership positions, you're going to want at least a few of them in the room with you to really help to talk to them, ask them what their experiences are like. Because let's face it, most of the leaders and decision makers um, tend to be pretty male and pale in a lot of firms and organizations. I don't expect a 60-year-old white man to understand the experience of my best friend who's Muslim and 40, and there's going to be a different experience. And how is that person really going to understand what the barriers and the challenges that my friend faces? They're probably not. They're not going to understand, and that's okay, as long as they go into it with that empathy, with that mindset of listening to learn and really deeply understand, so that they can make the decisions based on that empathy and based on that information. The other piece of assess, I think, that doesn't always get done or rarely gets done is really looking at the data, because data can reveal a lot of gaps that we wouldn't otherwise notice. For example, one example I like, and in law we bill, about a tenth of an hour, so we've got time records. But you can do this, I think, if anyone with the mind to do it can do it. And you want to look at things like work allocation and what about client team makeup? How is it selected? How are client teams selected? If it's going to be solely on, well, I like working with so and so, then that just opens the door wide for affinity bias, because we all do it. We all are more comfortable working with people who look, act, and sound like we do. So now we've listened to everybody. We've got a lot of different opinions. We've got a lot of information, a lot of lived experiences. It's time to bring those to the people that do make the decisions, give them that information, and help them get aligned around the problems that they need to address, and or the problems and issues that have surfaced based on this assess phase. And so we want to look at, maybe it is compensation, maybe it's hiring, maybe it's teams, who's picked for which teams. There's a lot of different problems, and so we're going to need leaders to come into alignment and say, look, this is the problem we want to work on. And by alignment, I don't mean perfect agreement. Good, if you get it, good for you. But I think we want to at least build that consensus around a common understanding of the problem. And of course, once we have that problem identified, we need to define it. And the example I like to give is, because we want to avoid embedding solutions into our problem statements, we want to make sure that we have opened the scope for ideation, for coming up with different ideas. And we want to make sure we define that problem well, and that we look maybe behind that problem and dig a little deeper to see, is that really the problem, or is that a symptom of the problem? And one example in terms of defining the problem that I like to give is designing a chair. So I'm assuming it has to be a chair. Or I say, design a way for me to rest off my feet. Well, now it could be a bed, sofa, hammock, beanbag, anything like that. So it really opens up the possibilities instead of embedding that solution. So we definitely want to make sure we are doing that. And before we move on into the action phase, we want to make sure that we've got our problem defined in a way that resonates with the people we're designing for. So now it's time to kind of take that temperature, pulse check of from the phase one, from the assessment phase. Go back to a few of those folks and say, hey, does this sound like the problem that we should solve? And hopefully you'll get positive feedback. You might get, well, but there's really this other issue behind that. So maybe it's like, well, there's a compensation disparity, yes, but the reason why is actually because of the non-promotable tasks or the client teams that these people are on. Because it's always, compensation disparities might be based on seemingly rational reasons, right? It could be, well, this person's got so much more experience in client work, client facing work, and so they deserve a bigger bonus. Well, why did they get that work and not somebody else? So we want to make sure we're asking those questions, we're looking a little deeper to make sure we've really gotten to the heart of the problem. And it's all about iteration. So the odds of you getting it right the first time are pretty slim, but we do want to give it a try. And it's all about testing, seeing what works, what doesn't, and moving on with that. Now, the act phase is one of my favorites because that's where we really get to dig in and we all get to be creative. And I think that's a really fun part. And so we start with our problem definition. We put it in a phrase. Usually designers like to use the how might we, and then we get to open up our minds and just get creative and figure out as many solutions, as ideas for solutions as we can. And there's not a lot of rules in design thinking, but there's a few guidelines here. No bad ideas. No idea is too wild, and good ideas can come from anywhere. Your file clerk might have a great idea on how to support your women attorneys. You never know. So, you want to make sure you make this process itself inclusive, which also does a um, good job of building buy-in and reducing resistance. People love to be part of the process, and this is a great place for those unofficial leaders or unofficial influencers to come in and be part of the process and building out the solutions. And they can really ideate, come up with lots of different ones. Now you've got this whole giant, pile of ideas. How in the world do you narrow them down and choose which one to focus on or which one to try first? And that can be actually pretty easy. I always say use a simple effort impact scale. So if you think of two lines across, a plus, and with effort on the horizontal axis and impact on the top axis, your sweet spot is the thing that's relatively low effort and relatively high impact. So now you take your notes, and we designers love our sticky notes, and you take your sticky notes with ideas on it and you just stick them. You guys decide as a group, preferably a small group, pretty unwieldy in big groups. You take a small group and you try to decide, like, just, based on what what do you think is going to take a lot of work, and what do you think is going to have a really, if it works, will have a really big impact. And so you put them in their appropriate quadrant. And you want to start with those relatively low effort, high impact, that sweet spot. Start with those. And your next action is going to be to build that out so that you can test it and get information. And then the last piece of the action is to run your experiments. And you're really looking for information on feasibility, like, can we physically do this, or and desirability. And that goes back to maybe your phase one assessment stuff, because you want to make sure that this is something people would actually like. And viability, is economically possible for us? Is this a sustainable thing we can keep doing? So we want to make sure we're designing experiments to give us that information. There's a lot of different ways that you can test ideas, and at least get some kind of information. And then, of course, we go into impact. And what I mean here is, we need to measure the impact. So we have to figure out, like, what do we want to change? What do we want? How can we measure the impact? How can we take what we've learned in our tests, in our experiments, and really apply it to see the impact that this is going to have? And at this point, it does get a little theoretical, because some of these things take a long time to really reap results. But we can still measure the impact in the moment. At the end of the day, it's about getting the right people in the right roles to do their best work. And when you achieve that, you get a few evidence-backed results from these types of initiatives. You get higher employee engagement. Because you're focusing on the things that employees actually value and want, they're going to respond with more loyalty, increased job satisfaction, and really and being just more engaged, which makes them more productive. You're going to improve your retention of your top talent of all kinds because you're going to have tailored retention strategies that fit your firm, fit your firm's people, and make them want to stay. You're also fostering a very healthy culture for all your employees, and that's going to help ensure that every top performer has the opportunity to succeed, has the opportunity to thrive and advance in your firm. And that's huge because we know now there are groups that have historically been excluded from that. They're just not moving forward. So when you have this culture where people feel supported and valued and seen, it's really going to improve everyone's performance. And I think that's key. So you're going to be able to leverage that potential of all your workers instead of just a few that fit the traditional former model of success. This cultivation of more leaders or more a wider range of our employees also means that we're creating a leadership pipeline that is diverse, and we get so much value out of that. We know that having a more diverse leadership group leads to greater organizational success over the long term. So we want to make sure that by supporting all employees, we are filling that pipeline. I hope you found this quick overview really helpful and inspiring. And if it's something that you think you'd like to bring into your own firm, let's hop on a call. Just click that book now button, book a call button, and make sure, and then we can chat. Also, I do only work with a few firms a year. So if this is of interest, you probably want to book a call as soon as possible to find a spot on my calendar. And last thing, if you do want the slides from today's presentation, go ahead and drop your email in that form over there and let me know, and I will send them right over to you with whether or not you book a call. So you can get those slides today. I look forward to sharing and learning from you, and together we can design a more fair and equitable workplace.